guys, Michelle here. In this video we are going to cover exactly how I packed my pack on Te Araroa. Now first up, before we get into the detail of exactly how I packed my pack on Te Araroa, I wanted to just cover off a couple of points for you. First and foremost, I do not want to tell you exactly how you should pack your pack on a long distance hike, and that's mainly because everybody is completely different. Everybody's needs on the trail are different. The things that people need to get access to quickly while they're hiking are different. So the way that you set your pack up is likely going to be a lot different from the way that I set my pack up. But for beginners and for people who are just starting out on their thru hiking journey, this video might be really helpful just to get them started thinking of how they want to pack their packs. I also wanted to cover off the fact that this is not necessarily the most efficient way to pack your pack. There is tons of information out there online, on YouTube, telling you exactly how you should pack your pack to maximize weight distribution, and quite frankly, when I was doing all my preparation for Te Araroa, I found it really overwhelming and quite confusing. The best way to find the perfect method for you of how to pack your pack for a long distance hike is to go out there and test it for yourself. And just be aware that this is not something that you're necessarily going to dial in over 1 or 2 multi-day trips, or even on the majority of a long distance thru hike. It took a really long time for me to dial down my pack to exactly how I like to have it packed when I was on the trail. And by a long time, I mean it basically took me the entire length of my 1800 kilometer thru hike. I think I pretty much had it dialed in by the time that I headed to the South Island to do the Queen Charlotte track, which was about 70 days into my journey. And that's because I was constantly trialing and testing different ways of packing my pack to see what worked for me, the way that I hike, and the things that I needed to get access to both during the day and then at night time when I got to camp. So again, this is just what worked for me on the Te Araroa trail. And of course, you're more than welcome to try this setup for yourself at home, but be prepared for the fact that you will change it once you start your long distance hiking journey. So let's get into it. The way that I packed my pack on Te Araroa was largely determined by what I was going to need and when I was going to need it. And this came down to 2 factors. Firstly, the number of times in the day that I was going to need to access that item, and secondly, how important it was going to be able to access that item quickly. My pack was also sort of specifically set up for the number of estuary and river crossings I was going to have to complete on Te Araroa. If you're familiar with the trail, you'll know that in the North Island there are a lot of estuary crossings right up in the Northland section, and then as you move further through the North Island, and then on the South Island you can be crossing rivers up to 80 times a day. Now, having completed a river safety course about 18 months ago, I know that one of the biggest things you can do to make sure that you're as safe as you can be when crossing a river is make sure to tuck away all the extraneous items of gear that you have hanging off of your pack. So I tried to make sure as much as possible that there was no excess gear hanging or stored on the outside of my pack, and that everything that was inside my pack was double or triple waterproofed. I also was very conscious that the way I packed my pack had to really work efficiently for me on the trail to maximize my time during the day. One of the worst things that can happen when you're out doing a long distance trail like a thru hike is that you can be stopping every hour or sometimes even every 30 minutes just to pull different items of gear out of your pack. So anything that I knew I was going to need during the day, I tried to make sure I could access without having to drop my pack. Okay, so let's get into the meat and bones of how I packed my pack. So if you're familiar with the Z-Pack's Arc Haul pack, then you'll know that the entire front side of that pack is covered in a mesh pocket, and that feature was really important for my decision to buy the pack in the first place. It's a great place to store items that you need to get quick access to throughout the day, and especially items that don't necessarily need to be waterproofed. Now, having said all of that, for a large proportion of the trail I didn't really end up maximizing the use of that mesh pocket as much as I would have liked to. In fact, most of the time I was on the trail, the only items that were really stored in there on a permanent basis were my water filter equipment, my sunscreen, and my hat if I wasn't wearing it. And this was because I realized quite early on in my hike that if I overstuffed that mesh pocket for any reason, I'd compromise the weight distribution of the pack and it would start to feel like it was pulling me backwards a little bit. So I tried to keep the amount of things in that mesh pocket to a real minimum and only the things that I really needed to get access to during the day. This included my rain pants and my rain jacket if it was a day where I looked up and it looked like it was going to rain. Now initially I'd taken into account the fact that if I needed to stop really quickly to go to the toilet on the trail, I wanted to make sure I had quick access to my toilet paper and my trowel. And so I was carrying that in the outside mesh pocket to start with. But then we had a day full of rain and my toilet paper and my trowel were only sealed in New Zealand's equivalent to the Ziploc bag, which by the way are not entirely waterproof, and by the time I got to camp at the end of the day I noticed that my toilet paper was saturated. So from that point onwards my toilet paper and my trowel just stayed on the inside of my pack, but easily accessible. Now I opted to purchase 2 belt pouches for my Z-Packs Artcool. So inside those belt pouches I would have all the things that I needed to get quick access to on multiple occasions during the day. So this would include things like snacks, my lip balm which I would apply multiple times throughout the day, my knife which I would usually always need at lunchtime and I just found it was too annoying to carry it around my neck, any electronic items that I had that I wanted to get quick access to. So sometimes this would be my cell phone, although usually that just rode in one of the side pockets attached to its tripod, the headphones that I attached to my cell phone, and possibly even the microphone that I was using to record my videos. A couple of other items that are really important to get access to quickly, like a little Ziploc bag with my wallet and my ID in, and also my ACR Rescue Link beacon, which you should always carry your beacon close to you in a quick access place. There were also a couple of other items that I used occasionally, things like my buff that I used to use on windy or cold days, and then also my sun gloves which I was trialing out off and on throughout the trip. The third place for external storage on the Z-Packs Artcool is of course the side pockets, and for me they were basically exclusively used to store water. Now if you've watched my post Te Araroa through hike gear video, you'll know that for the most part along the trail I was carrying 2 1-litre water bottles, one in each side of my Z-Packs Artcool. Now I chose to go with the 2 single water bottle setup as opposed to a hydration bladder. For me, I wanted to minimize as much weight as possible, and I'd rather carry the 2 plastic water bottles which basically weighed nothing over a hydration bladder that weighed a few hundred grams. So the interior of my pack was actually also loosely organized in order of the importance in which I would need the items inside. And I'd say that actually I ended up organizing the interior in basically a 3 compartment system. For most of the way along Te Araroa, the items in that top third would be those that I needed to access at least once, maybe twice throughout the day, or I just needed quick access to in case the weather or some other situation changed. So my food bag would usually sit right on top of my pack in the space that was available, and then usually underneath that I would lay my camp shoes. And if it was a day where it didn't look like it was going to rain, then I'd still make sure I had my rain jacket and my rain pants somewhere up in that top third of the pack, just in case I needed them for any other sort of weather protection, like protection from the wind. Now in the middle section of my pack I would store things that I probably wasn't going to need during the day, but that were still accessible if I did need to get to them for any reason. So this would be things like my cooking system, my warm down jacket just in case the weather turned when I stopped to take lunch, my electronics bag, and my toiletries bag, which also included my first aid and repair kit. It was relatively easy to get to any of those items during the day just by removing a couple of things out of the top third of my pack. And in the bottom third section of my pack I would store the things that I'd basically only need once I got to camp at the end of the day. So that would be my warm and dry camp clothes, which I would need at the end of the day so I could get out of my stinky and sweaty hiking clothes, my quilt which I would stuff into a waterproof Sea to Summit stuff sack, my sleeping pad and the pump sack and the inflatable pillow that I rolled all down together, and then my tent. Now there are a couple of things that I could say about the way that I stored those items that I would need for camp at the end of the day. A lot of hikers out there will just stuff their quilts right down into the bottom of their pack to maximize the available space. But again, I tried to pack my pack specifically for the river and estuary crossings that I knew I was going to be coming up against on Te Araroa. And in that regard, I just wanted to make sure that my quilt, which was basically my last line of defense for keeping myself warm and dry on the trail, was protected as much as it possibly could be. And that's why part of my system also included lining the entire inside of my pack with at least one, maybe even two standard bin bags. Now, as far as my tent goes, I had a bit of a nightmare time trying to figure out where the best place was for me to store my tent. Now, there's sort of a general idea in long distance hiking that you want to store the items that you need to access at the end of the day in some sort of reverse order, so that you're pulling out the thing first that you need to set up to give yourself shelter. And the reason for this is so that you can protect those items that you really need to keep dry if you have to end up setting up your shelter in adverse weather conditions for any reason. This is why a lot of long distance hikers will often store their tent on top of anything else in their pack so that they can pull that out first and get it set up, and then get inside their tent to unpack the rest of their gear. For the first 2 or 3 weeks on the trail, I actually ended up packing my tent down in the bottom third of my pack, along with the other items that I would need at the end of the day. But of course, I found that over the course of the trail, as I was putting my tent up in more and more adverse weather conditions, that it just didn't make sense for me to pull out every single other item in my pack before I could even get my tent set up. Also, there were a lot of days where I had to pack my tent away still wet from the condensation that had built up overnight, or perhaps it was wet because we'd been rained on during the night. So pretty quickly I sort of transitioned to attaching the tent to the attachment straps on the outside of my pack, and that worked pretty well for basically the majority of the trail. In fact, I was using that system pretty much all the way down to the end of the Queen Charlotte track. But as I got closer to the end of my time on Te Araroa, and I was noticing that the amount of food that I needed to carry was dwindling, so that I might only be carrying 3 or 4 days worth of food at a time, I found that I had a lot more space in that top third of my pack. And so I noticed that I could actually fit my tent horizontally in the top third of my pack alongside my food bag, and then also my sitting pad, which before then was previously just attached to the outside of my pack. And I found that this particular way of packing my pack really worked for me by the time that I finished up the trail, and in particular it worked on a weight distribution front. When I was attaching my tent to the outside of my pack, again I noticed that sometimes it could unbalance the way that my pack rode on my shoulders and my hips, and so sometimes I'd start experiencing little niggling pains in various areas of my body because of that. Now, whilst we're on the subject of stabilizing the pack, I also set up my pack in this way to make sure that the heaviest items of my gear were generally in the middle of my pack. So pretty early on in my hike, I knew that the heaviest items in my pack were basically my entire cook system, my electronics bag, and then my toiletries bag. And so these sort of sat nicely next to each other in that middle third of my pack. But I did have to be really quite careful about how I packed them, because my electronics bag and my toiletries bag were both Sea to Summit roll top dry bags, and I noticed that if they were particularly full and I put them in the wrong way in my pack, they would start to dig into my back. I'd usually get around this problem by trying to put my clothes bag up against my back so that that was a nice soft surface for it to rub up against. Now, some people might say, but hang on a minute, you were carrying a sitting pad with you, why didn't you just fold that in half and use that as a backrest to go inside your pack? Well, that is of course a completely viable option, and if that's something that you want to try out and maybe something that you end up liking for yourself, then go ahead and do that. But for me, I use that sitting pad every single day, multiple times a day, and I just did not want to have to be unrolling my pack every time I wanted to use it, pulling it out from behind, which inevitably would involve me basically unpacking my entire pack anyway, and then having to try and get it back down inside when I wanted to leave and carry on hiking. I just found it much more convenient to either have it attached to the side of my pack or as I mentioned before, to have it sitting inside at the top when my pack wasn't quite so full. Alright guys, that sums up exactly how I packed my pack on Te Araroa. I hope that's given you some ideas of things that you can try out at home with your pack setup to see what works best for you. I'd really love to hear how you have your pack set up, so don't forget to go ahead and leave me a comment in the section down below. If you like the work that I do here, you enjoy watching these videos, and you want to support this channel at no extra cost to you, then you can do so really easily by liking this video, hitting that subscribe button and dinging the notification bell. Don't forget to tune in on Friday next week, where I will be sharing with you my 5 top tips for dealing with post-trail depression.